Hello dear students, welcome to 2Exam. In today's session, we are going to see about the parts of the flowering plant. Why the flower is involved in the process of reproduction, especially in plants. Shall we quickly get into the topic? Yes? So in the earlier class, we saw about what is reproduction is. And of course, the reproduction can be categorized under two heads. It is sexual and the asexual method. So we saw in asexual method some of the processes like the binary fission, multiple fission, and we saw with the fragmentation, we saw with the regeneration, and so on. In this session, we are going to deal about the flowering plants, and here most flower reproduces sexually. For producing what? For producing flowers. And to be very clear enough, these flowers are very vital, or they play a very important role in the process of sexual reproduction. Do you know why the flowers are very bright and radiant? That is because the flowers are the sexual part of a plant. Now let's categorize this flower under the following divisions. So the male part of the flower will be the stamens, as you see in the figure there. This stamens comprises of the anther and the filament. I tell you again, the male part of the flower will be the stamen. Just you can see in the picture there. And this stamen again comprises under two heads. One will be the anther and the next one will be the filament. Now let's see what is a stamen is. The stamen is the reproductive part, the male reproductive part of a flower, and it comprises, or it can be categorized under two heads. The first one will be the anther, the second one will be the filament. So the next part of the flower is the pistil. What is this pistil? As you can see in the picture there. The pistil will be the female reproductive part. And of course, this female reproductive part comprises of three parts. The first part will be the stigma, the second part will be the style, and the third one will be the ovary. Now, what is the function of the stigma? The main function of the stigma is that the stigma is very sticky, and it is in form of a bulb. Okay, it is very sticky and is the form of a bulb. And what is the main function of this stigma is that it helps to catch the pollen grains from the male part. That is a main function. Because where is this pollen grain seen? The pollen grain is seen in the anther. Pollen grain is seen in the anther, especially in the stamen part of the male plant. So that is the main function of the stigma. When you talk about the style, what is this style, or why it has to function? What function it has to do in the process of reproduction? Of course, it helps to pass the pollen grains easily, to pass away the pollen grains, and that is a function of the style. And what does this ovary has to do? The ovary is nothing but it is the part of the pistil, and it holds the ovum, or it holds the egg, and therefore it helps in the process of fertilization. So once the egg is got hold there, it needs to be fertilized. So it is an awaiting process, or it is waiting for the process of fertilization. So the next part will be the calyx. What is this calyx? The calyx forms the outermost wall of a flower, and of course it comprises of some small units, and that small unit is called as the sepals. when you take in the bud stage, when you take the bud stage of a flower, in the bud stage, this calyx is enclosed. This encloses the rest of the flower, and usually they are normally exhibited in green coloration, and after some times they may be in color, depends upon the petal or the coloration of the petal. So this type of a calyx is termed as a petaloid. This type of a calyx is termed as a petaloid, and it can be either present or it can be absent. So it can be prominent or it can be also absent. So that is the speciality of the calyx. The next part will be the corolla. What is this corolla is? Of course, the corolla will form the second hole of the flower. And the petals are sometimes, they are very, very scented. Or in terms of biology, we say it has beautiful fragrance. It has a beautiful fragrance, and they are very, very colored. They are very attractive. They are very colored. These petals are, right. You can categorize like roses, like tulips. Then many ornamental flowers are also there. We really go crazy on seeing these flowers, right? It's naturally and biologically made, and these petals naturally have the fragrance in them, and they are highly colored, they are highly pigmented, they are colored, and of course very thin and soft, and therefore it helps in the process of pollination. Why does it involve the process of pollination? I already told you the petals are very, very colorful, and there's fragrance too. So this is a point where the insects come and attract the flower, and after this process the pollination takes place. The process of pollination takes place as they would attract the insects, some animals and also some birds. That is why it is naturally and biologically beautifully and wonderfully made. The next part will be the androecium. The androecium forms the male part of a flower. And what does it comprises of? Of course, it comprises of the stamens. It comprises of the stamens. And it is a third hole. It is a third hole. And here, each stamen, when you take each stamen, comprises of two distinct parts. It comprises of the two parts, namely the anther and the filament. Namely, it comprises of the anther and the filament. So the tip of the anther, when you take the tip of the anther is made in such a way, it is supported by a filament. It is supported by the filament. And here, once it is supported by a filament, the pollens here, they are produced, or they are made by undergo a mitotic process. What is a meiotic process? What is meiotic processes? I already discussed in the previous class. These are the different cell divisions, the mitosis and the meiosis. So when you talk about the mitosis normally takes place in the asexual reproduction, okay, and where it involves only one single cell. But when you take in meiosis, two cell divisions takes place. So hence from the two it divides into 4 daughter cells. So all are in haploid condition, the N condition they say. So here the pollens are produced by the meiosis, and they eventually, what happen? They eventually disappear. And of course the next part will be the anther. What is this anther is? Now this anther is a four-lobed, it's a four-lobed organ or a four-lobed sac, I can tell you. Why it is in four-lobe structure? Because it is responsible for the pollen formation. It is responsible for the pollen formation. So when you talk about the filaments, what are these filaments are? Of course, these filaments are thread-like structures. These thread-like structures are attached to the anther, and they keep the anther in place. The next part of the flower will be the gynoecium. The gynoecium again is a female reproductive organ, and it is the last part of the flower. Here it is composed, or it is enclosed by a pistil. And where do you see this pistil? This pistil is occupied exactly in the central part, exactly in the central part of the thalamus. It is located in the central part of the thalamus, and it comprises of, as you see in the figure, the stigma, the style, and the ovary. It comprises of the stigma, the style, and the ovary. These are the beautiful and the distinct components of the pistil. Now, what does this ovary produces? This ovary produces the ovules. The ovary produces the ovules. And where is this seen? It is seen internally. So, through the process of meiosis, this ovules produce megasporangium. Megaspores. Okay, it produces the megaspores, which later again develops into one more part called as the female gametophyte. As a result, as a net result of all these processes, the egg cells or the ovum or the egg cells are produced. The egg cells are produced. So the gynoecium, when you talk about the gynoecium can be again classified under three heads. Let us discuss now what are these three heads are. The first category will be the monocarpellary. As the word mono means one. So the gynoecium consists of the single pistil. The gynoecium consists of the single pistil, and I can quote out some example here. The best example will be the beans and the peas. The green peas and the beans are the monocarpellary, that is the gynoecium, which consists of one single pistil. Okay, the next part will be the multicarpellary. What is the multicarpellary here? Multi means many. Here the gynoecium comprises of more than one pistil. It comprises of more than one pistil, and so the term multicarpellary. And the next part of the part will be the syncarpus. Syncarpus, you synchronize. Syn means you synchronize. What do you mean by that? You combine. Here also, the gynoecium is combined with the pistil. The gynoecium is combined with the pistil, and the example will be the tomatoes and the cucumbers. Comes under the category of the syncarpus. The next category will be the apocarpus. Here, it is free from the pistil. So, it is the gynoecium which is free from the pistil. Example, the lotus. Then I can tell you this lotus, vinca, all these comes in the category of this apocarpus. And each pistil, when you take each pistil has the three parts. As I already discussed, the ovary. The ovary is a chamber where the ovules, especially the eggs, the ovum, especially the eggs are stored there, and it is waiting for the process of fertilization. The next part will be the stigma, and the stigma will always connect the ovary. And of course, the next part will be the stigma. The stigma, the style, is a tubular structure which connects the ovary, and the stigma is normally responsible. It helps the transportation of pollens from the stigma. From the stigma, where finally it goes and where it goes and reaches, it goes and reaches to the ovary, and this is the place where it holds the egg, and therefore it helps in holding the stigma firmly in the place. So here you can see that this method of transportation, that especially from the male flower to the female part of the stigma, to make the pollination very meaningful, or to make the pollination very a successful one, the pollen grains, it has to be transferred from where? From the same species of the flower. So let's discuss some of the processes which helps in the pollination. So the process of the pollination begins, it exactly starts when the pollen grains from the flower holds on to the stigma. It holds on to the stigma and the pollen tube, and to form a pollen tube within the style. Now here with the style. Now as a result, when uh, it forms a pollen tube with a style, it gets connected. Okay, it gets connected. How it gets connected? From the stigma, both the stigma and the ovary. So both the stigma and the ovary gets connected. So after this process, especially after the completion of this process, the pollen tubes here, the grains, especially the pollen grains, starts to transmit the sperm cells. It transmits the sperm cells from the grain to the ovary. So later what happens? Later the process of fertilization, especially in plants, will take place. It will take place when the sperm cell reaches the ovary and the egg cells. So this will take place when the sperm cells will reach the ovary and the egg cells. So the seed, when you have to talk about the seed is then released. So after this fertilization, the seed is released from the plant. Which plant? From the parent plant. From the parent plant, and it helps to, it is making itself, parent plant, and makes itself to grow into a plant, into a fully plant, and it continues and it continues the process of reproductive cycle. And here the process continues with the reproductive cycle with the techniques of the pollination method. With the techniques of the pollination method. So the next part of the our session will be the types of pollination. So far we saw about what is pollination, what are the processes which involves in pollination, and of course the flower plays a very important role in the pollination. Now let's discuss about the categories of pollination. So when you take about the categories, all plants have the flowers, especially the plants which has flowers, they rely on the pollination. Why? Because flowers by nature, they are very vibrant in color. They are sweet smelling. Of course, they have the pollen grains, the pollen tubes, the stigma, the style, everything is there. So, hence it is a very adaptable or an easy process where the process of pollination takes place. Of course, the pollination can be categorized under two categories as you see in the figure. The first one will be the self-pollination and the second one will be the cross-pollination. So, let's discuss about what is self-pollination is. The self-pollination is referred to the primary type, or it is the first type of pollination, as as it involves a single flower, or here the pollination takes place with the help of a single flower. So the self-pollination occurs. Here it occurs when the grains, especially when the pollen grains, they fall uh, exactly, or they fall directly exactly from the anther into the stigma of the flower. And such process, this process is very rapid, or I can tell you this process is very fast. At the same time, it is the simplest and the very rapid process which leads to the reduction sometimes in the genetic diversity. Why? Which leads to the reduction in the genetic diversity, as the sperm and the egg cells sometimes, sometimes the sperm and the egg cells of the flower share only some. I prompt the word here, some, not all, only some genetic information. They share only some genetic information. So only one limited portions of the gene, the hereditary material is transferred. That's why the reduction takes place in this category. So here the sperms and the egg cells of the flower, they share only a limited genetic information, and it is referred to as the type of pollination that allows the transfer of the pollen grains. Here it refers to here the transfer of the pollen grains, especially the cross pollination. It refers to a complex form. It is not that simple. It is a complex form or a complex type of pollination that allows the transfer of the pollen grains from the anther of a flower, from the anther of the flower into the stigma of another flower. You can see as in the picture itself, it will not take place in the same flower, but it will take place in some other flower. It takes place in the some other flower, and this methods, what happens, it leads to the increase in the diversity, especially in the genetic level, in the genetic diversity. What is diversity? Diversity is having multiple different species. So here, since the pollination takes place in two different flowers, you can see a diverse variety of new species in plant kingdom to create a very unique uh, the offspring, to create a very unique offsprings. So here you can see some of the pollination which takes place. I'll tell you, some of the pollination normally takes place through wind, through water. It is called as hydrophily. When it takes place in wind, it is called as anemophily. Okay, then which takes place in with insects and animals is called as, especially in animals, it's called as a zoophily, and so on. So let's discuss what is this pollination and how it can be categorized with the agents. The first category will be the pollination by wind. It is otherwise termed as the anemophily. It is otherwise termed as the anemophily. Here, only a few flower that uses uh, this pollination through wind, and their features, if you see the features, they are very greenish, small and colorless flowers. They are normally greenish, small and colorless flowers. And the next speciality of these flowers is they do not attract the pollinators. They do not attract any type of pollinators. And therefore, since they don't attract the pollinators, even the energy is also not used for making the colorful petals there. So this type of pollination usually is seen when the plants lack the nectars, when they lack the sweetness, that is the nectars and the other features. So the male part of the anemophilous flower, that is the especially which helps in the pollination of wind, tend to produce very large quantities of the pollen stuffs and the pollen and the stigma. They produce a large quantities of the pollen and the stigma. And of course, when you take the female part of the flower, they are very large. The female part of the flower, they are very large, sticky, and also they are also very feathery. Why? To Because they're feathery to complete the outside of the to compete with the outside of the flower. Such pollen is more, they are more likely to go and get itself adapted there. Such pollen is normally go and gets itself adapted to such a kind. I can tell you some of the examples, that is the coconut trees, the palm, the maize, and also the grasses, they comes under this category. And next category will be the pollination of animals. When you take the pollination of animals, it can be said in terms of biology as zoophily, because as the word zoo pertains to animals, so animals are the pollinators here. So animals plays a very distinct role here, a very beautiful role here in plant reproduction. So what do? They help in transversing the seed, especially they helps in the seed dispersal. So when an animal eats, when it eats a pulp, maybe a fruit can also be said as a pulp, right? So when the animal eats the pulp of a plant, and when they go when supposing after they eat, they just go to one location to a different location. This movement helps in transferring the seed part. Okay, this movement helps in transferring the seed with this process, and this helps in this process, and therefore new varieties of plants are produced in all different categories or in different locations. That is the main speciality by the animals. And the next one will be the artificial pollination. When you talk about the artificial pollination, I can tell you it is anthrophyli. They say in terms of biology, it is called as the anthrophyli. What is this artificial process of fertilization, pollination is? Now, this is done by the human beings itself, and so the term anthrophyli. Anthropophyli. Here, in anthropophyli, if there are any difficulties in pollination process, especially in abiotic and biotic, or the abiotic and biotic. What is abiotic is? What is abiotic and biotic is? Biotic, bio means life. So the life with organisms, and the non-living substances, the non-living agents. Okay, the both in comparisons are called as abiotic and biotic. Normally this takes place through the abiotic and the biotic factors. The artificial method of this process is performed uh, by separating the pollens, or by spreading the pollens over the female flowers. So as a result, here comes the technique called hybridization, so combining or mixing. The hybridization techniques are also used in this process, in this artificial process. Next, let's see what is the advantages and the disadvantages. Of course, when you talk about the advantages, the new offsprings are very healthier. The new offsprings are very healthier, and of course, these seeds are produced in large number. The seeds are produced in large number, and they are very viable. They are very it's easy to get. They are very viable there, and the seeds also develop. Once the seeds develop, they started to germinate. Once the seeds develop, they start to germinate. Once they start to germinate, they start to grow. Once they start to grow, they become the best plants or the better plants for the survival. So this is the theory behind the process. So as a result, what happens? New varieties are produced. It results in the new varieties because of the cross pollination, and this cross pollination is always carried. It is always carried between the two different varieties. Two different varieties of the same species. It is carried between the two different varieties of the same species, and also with even two species. And here some of the disadvantages of this cross pollination is, it is not always certain as this pollination agent is required, and they may not, sometimes they may be available, sometimes they may not be available, depends upon the time and the availability. That is one of the disadvantages. And the pollen grains have to be produced. How they have to be produced? In numerous quantities. It should be produced in abundant to ensure the chances, or to ensure that the pollination takes place successfully. And as a result, what happens? It results in wastage of pollens. As a result, it results in the wastage of pollens. So it is not an economic for the plant. It becomes an uneconomical part of the plant, as they have to produce the flowers. How the flowers have to be produced? The flowers certainly has to be in large and they also should be scented. They must be very fragrant, and they should also contain the sweet smelling agent called the nectar. Only if they have all the possibilities, they can attract the insects for pollination. So these are some of the disadvantages of the cross pollination. The next subtopic will be the fertilization, which takes place in a flowering plants. So in plants, the fertilization process of the sexual reproduction normally occurs. When does it occur? After the pollination and the germination. So here the fertilization is a process of the sexual reproduction which occurs just after the pollination and the germination. So what is fertilization here? Fertilization I can define, or it is defined as the fusion or the union. The fusion can in other ways it can be said as union. The fusion can be defined as a union of the male gametes. Here in flower, the male gametes is none other than the pollen grains. So the male gametes, the pollen grains, with the female gamete. What is the female gamete here? The eggs. In other ways, I can tell the ovum. So the eggs, the male and the female gametes together to form a 2N, which is a diploid zygote. What is that condition? It is the 2N stage, or it is a diploid zygote. Here it is one type of a process, especially the physical and the chemical together. It undergoes the physiochemical, I can say. It's a physiochemical processes which occurs just after the pollination. So the complete set of this process, it takes place inside the zygote, in the zygote. Why it has to take place in the zygote? Once it has to take place in zygote, so as to develop into a seed. After this process only, it takes place in part of the zygote to develop into a seed. So some of the fertilization, let's see the processes which involved in the fertilization. Of course, the fertilization process in flowers especially, the pollen grains, what do? They germinate. The pollen grains, what do? They germinate. Once they germinate after the pollination, and they grow into the tube. After the pollination, they grow into the tube by creating a pathway. They create a pathway for the pollen grain to move down to the ovary, just as you can see in the figure. Okay, so start growing into the style, and they start creating a pathway. Just you can see in the figure there, it creates a pathway to reach the ovary, especially just at the down part of the thing. So the pollen grains, they move to the ovary. The pollen tubes, what happens? So you can see the pollen tubes there. This the green color part, that is the circular part there. The pollen tubes, it opens into the ovule. It opens into the pollen tubes. It opens into the ovule through a micropole, through a division called as a micropole. And later, as soon as it enters there, it starts to burst. It starts to burst into what? Into the embryo sac, where it consists of the newly formed, the new individuals. It bursts into the embryo sac. So here, the male nuclei, here you can see the male nuclei, it will unite with the eggs. Especially, it will unite to the nucleus of the egg, which is right inside the ovule. Okay, later what happens? It forms as a 2N, or it forms as a diploid zygote, and later it swells up, after which it swells up. Soon after the swelling takes place, it develops into a pulp. The pulp is nothing but the fruit of the plant. So the next subdivision will be the double fertilization. What is double fertilization is? The double fertilization, it's a very complex process of fertilization. It is a complex fertilization which involves, what does it involve? The union. It involves, just you can see in the figure there, it involves the union of one female gametophyte with the two male nuclei. The second figure which shows two male nuclei. Okay, so one female gametophyte, that is one egg, with the two female eggs. You can see in the second picture on top, you can see the two distinct points, just like eyes, right? These are the two nuclei of the two male nuclei. In this process, what happens? One female gamete, they go and unite with the two male nuclei. They go and unite with the two male nuclei. So one of the male gametes, what do? One of the male gametes, they fertilize the egg. So after this fertilization, what does it results in? Soon after the fertilization, it results in the formation of a zygote, the young one, the embryo, you can say. It helps in the formation of the zygote, and the other two will unite with the two polar nuclei. When you talk about the two polar nuclei, you can see in the picture right away there, the two polar nuclei for the formation of what? For the formation of endosperm. For the formation of the endosperm. So let's see what is this double fertilization provides. This double fertilization, it provides external response, or the stimulus. It provides the stimulus to the plant, thereby resulting in the formation to form the fruits. And further, this divides into it gets itself matured to form into ovules, and this ovules is again formed into a seed. So when the N male, or when the haploid male nucleus and the female gametophysis fuses, when it both fuses, the diploid state, the 2N condition, the 2N condition, I told you it's diploid. This diploid state of the plant is sustained, or I can tell you it is stored, it is stored there. The next process of the fertilization will be the double fertilization. So what is this double fertilization is? The double fertilization, again, it will be it's a complex substance, or it's a complex process through which the two sperms one fuses with the egg cell and other fuses with the nuclei. So what happens as a result when two fuses? It results in the I told you one condition that is called as a diploid, that is the 2N condition, zygote, and they again form a triploid, zygote and a triploid. The triploid is nothing but the 3N, that is the primary endosperm nucleus. That is called as the endosperm, or the 3N conditions there. So since the endosperm, what happens? It becomes a product. It becomes the end product of the fusion. What happens here? So in diploid, we saw two nucleus. Okay, two nucleus. Here, 3 haploid nucleus is produced in the fusion. So as a result, it is called as what? It is called as a triple fusion. So later what happens in this process, this primary endosperm nucleus, it develops. What it develops into? It develops into a endosperm cell and finally into a endosperm. So the zygote becomes the embryo. After that, what happens? The zygote becomes the embryo after the numerous division. After the numerous division, what happens? It becomes as an embryo in the cell divisions. So the next part will be the reproduction in humans. So all of us know that all living organism has the capacity to multiply and to reproduce. Why? To produce the offspring of the same kind, right? So that process is called as the reproduction. And of course, this reproduction is a very mandatory process. What do you mean by mandatory process? It's a compulsory process, or it is an essential process for the life on earth, especially for making the species to live on earth. And that is why life becomes continuous here. The life becomes continuous. It is a continuation of the life processes. So of course, in humans, the testes are the main reproductive structures, which is found in the males, where the sperms, that is sperms, are produced. And the ovum is nothing but the egg. It is produced where? It is produced inside the ovary. So let's just discuss in detail about the reproductive system of the male and the female systems. The male reproductive organ in male will be a pair of the testes, and of course they produce the male sex cell called as the sperm. So this pair of testes produce a male cell. It is a living cell of a man, right? And they produce, it's a sex cell also, they produce the male sex cell called the sperms. And what do they produce? They produce the hormone, an important sex hormone called as the testosterone. They produce a male important hormone called the testosterone. The main reproductive organ in the males will be a pair of testes. And they are present, where do they are present? They are contained in a sac, or they are contained in a sac-like structure which is seen on the outer surface of the body. And of course, this consists of many tubes, and that tube is called as the seminiferous tubules. That is the main property of the main reproductive organ. So it contains the seminiferous tubules, and these seminiferous tubules are nothing but it is the structural and the functional unit. How the cell is a structural and functional unit of the body, we already studied in earlier chapters. Likewise, in males, this sex cell sperms is very important, is essential for the reproduction, as it produces the male hormone called testosterone. And of course, here it has many tubules called as the seminiferous tubules, and the main function of the seminiferous tubules is it forms the structural and the functional unit. The male sex cells, what are these male sex cells are called? These male sex cells are called as the sperms, and of course they are produced by the seminiferous tubules. And what do? They mature in the next part of the reproductive system, which is called as the epididymis. It is called as the epididymis. Of course, there you have some more cells called as the Leydig cells, the Leydig cells. The other form, or the other way of saying Leydig cells, will be the interstitial cells. The interstitial cells, and these cells are exactly present between the seminiferous tubules, because they help in secreting the male hormone called the testosterone. And of course, they also has an important gland there. The important gland will be the, what is the important gland? The important gland will be the prostate gland. The prostate gland and the seminiferous tubules, both are the glands of the reproductive system, especially which makes the semen, which helps in producing the semen. Why does this semen is produced? Because to nourish the sperm cells. That is why this semen is produced. The semen is normally produced because to nourish the sperm cells. Of course, the urethral tract or the urethra, now this acts as a common passage. It becomes as a common passage for both the semen and the urine to pass through. Okay, so with this we'll end the session. Maybe in the next class or the next session I will be teaching you about the female reproductive system. What is the female reproductive system? What are the hormones? And we also will be dealing about the cycle, the menstrual cycle, and of course the embryo stages, the embryogenesis, the stages of the fetus, how it develops. All this we will be seeing in the next part of our session, next part of our lesson. So if you like this video, please share this video. Please subscribe to our channel, to Exion, and of course don't forget to hit the thumbs up button there. So meet you all in the third part of our lesson. Hope you all do well. If you have queries, do post your valuable comments in the comment box. Take care, children.